This is what I've actually heard from people quite a lot. Essentially, if you've played SmackDown, No Mercy, WCW NWO World Tour, then play WarZone afterwards, you're probably going to hate it. Now, as I just explained, I first personally got into wrestling during the late 90s and very early 2000s, so being stuck with a PlayStation, despite asking for an N64, meant that my first real taste of wrestling games that stood out to me was SmackDown, released in 2000. Therefore, by the time I actually bothered to play WarZone or even Attitude, I already had tasted something so sweet. There really is no way to go from one to the other. They just don't compare in any way.
Now we're going to be taking a quick look at the N64 version of WarZone. There are obvious differences in almost every way, apart from the gameplay, which is sadly left untouched. The graphics are different, the soundtrack is radically different, and that's mainly due to the fact that it is a cartridge-based games, so yeah. But the main thing about this title that I really do enjoy is the fact that the loading screens are completely gone, something that also happens in Attitude if you haven't played that title.
The game on the N64 though does look really different. It's smoother. There's like a motion blur put over everything. It's hard to explain. In the same way that the models and textures in WCW World Tour are worse than the PlayStation's offerings, this title on the N64 just has its own charm to it. Almost as though in losing something, it gains something else. In not being a perfectly sharp image, it instead comes across as a better image overall, at least in my eyes. The N64 version also includes a Royal Rumble mode, which is because the N64 has no loading times, and it's actually a seamless version of that match type, something that even the later SmackDown titles on the PlayStation was unable to achieve. There's even the Gauntlet mode, which is exactly the same as the Royal Rumble. The gameplay is exactly the same though. As for the sound in this title, as I say, the PlayStation version is the better of the two. You actually have the commentary and you have the wrestlers talking throughout the matches, which can lead to some very, very, very interesting moments, especially when you're beating up Mankind and he's squealing like a pig. Now, as I just explained, I first personally got into wrestling during the late 90s and very early 2000s, so being stuck with a PlayStation, despite asking for an N64, meant that my first real taste of wrestling games that stood out to me was SmackDown, released in 2000. Therefore, by the time I actually bothered to play WarZone or even Attitude, I already had tasted something so sweet. There really is no way to go from one to the other. They just don't compare in any way. I even went and bought ECW, which we will get into in the future years of this video, after the WWF Invasion angle, because I was really interested in playing as Rob Van Dam, and I remember just playing maybe a few matches and never really touching it again. So we'll get to that story later on.